Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, thanks, Darren, very much for the presentation. Clearly, Darren worked with a great deal of information, which was one of the really impressive things about this. Um, we could start off with Tina's question in the chat. What did you find most interesting about the Arizona food supply chain?
Well, because I live here, that is interesting. But I think population is really interesting because here in Arizona, we have this really interesting mix of highly urban, with Maricopa County being the fastest growing county in the country and Phoenix being one of the largest cities in the country. But then we have places like Greeley that has like 50,000 people. But then also even more beautiful is that we have these tribal governments and we have these counties that almost with the Navajo country and Navajo Nation, they take up most of northeastern Arizona. And so we have all of these anecdotes. We have all of these awesome kind of melting pots where other country or other counties and other states don't even have these kind of ideas. They don't have a tribal government, or they don't have a urban city or a rural area. Um, Connecticut. I would consider maybe there is rural Connecticut, but not the same kind of rural that we maybe have with a couple extra R's in Arizona. So that would be my kind of what I found interesting.
Okay, great. Thanks, Darren. And a question from Sam in the chat. How do you think rural communities and groceries can create more experience or make local food more appealing? So a question specific to
Mm-hmm.
rural communities and suppliers.
Yeah, so something that's kind of been interesting is local has been kind of pushed in the urban areas most and has been kind of affluence. I think if people have money and the ability to kind of think about their food choices, they can actually choose a boundary and a line. Whereas in rural parts of the country, people are producing the food and then they're exporting it to consumption in larger population centers. And so I think that it's important for rural communities to have these organizations that I studied. So having these local food influencers that help create policy, that help create businesses, that have nonprofits, that have educational institutions. It's really important that we fill those gaps and we help the current producers in rural America to highlight their localness because they are local. Unfortunately, and this is kind of anecdotal, local has been seen as a more liberal or leftist word. And so there's a lot of really interesting food messaging in more conservative states where they talk about it being Montana grown or Bozeman grown. And so they actually draw you to a place. And it's not about the word local, it's actually about uniting you with the person that's producing it with you. And so I think that's kind of what we need to see is local is not a abstract thought. It's based on context and based on the local community, and we need to market it as such. We need to let communities choose what it is because local is a place-based, geographically centered argument foundationally. As much as we'd want to ascribe local as organic, I would put a red light up and say, hey, that's kind of a misattribute.
Okay, thanks. And there's a few more questions in the chat. Maria's question: what was your favorite part of your research?
Oh boy. Well, originally I wanted to interview people and kind of figure out what they meant, and then I realized that COVID kind of happened, and I also found that I could do a larger net and do more anecdotal. And obviously, my information was drawn on people's websites and the documents they provided, and obviously people might tell me, "Hey, that's not what we meant," and I am totally okay with them telling me I'm wrong, and that's fine. But I really tried to. Gather as much information because I want to see people talk about this. I feel that academics need to provide the foundational knowledge that we can then discuss and move forward with. And I hope that this kind of is providing people something. By far, I'm not an expert, but I definitely have found that I might be kind of becoming becoming one, I guess, in a way, which is, uh, yeah, it's weird because I try to consider myself to be humble. And so when I say I'm an expert, it seems like there's like big boy pants or big person pants I have to wear.
Well, I think you're certain. I think you are there. Um, let's see. A couple couple more questions. If your findings could be translated into an impactful policy shift, what would that be?
Oh yeah. So I have one of the stakeholders is government agencies, and they have a really good role policy wise because they can both create structure, they can provide funding, and they can provide validation. I've found that if a county government were to have their own county local like push, they could actually verify, is the farm being low till? Is it a small family farm that makes under $100,000? When you start to localize responsibility, you remove the distance from which people can lie and cheat and steal. And so I love the organic USDA standard, but there's a lot of loopholes, a lot of issues with it. And this is anecdotally, but my grandfather, talking to him in his farming, he said that local to him is he wants to talk to the decision maker. He wants to talk to the person that's responsible. And so even if it's across Canada, across Japan, if he's talking to the person, that's local to him, because then the responsibility is on somebody and it's not this abstract 50 miles. And so he, interestingly enough, he sells directly to his neighbor, but he also sells, like I said, across the world. And so it's interesting, we have to kind of build it based on the framework. I would say that governments, once again, they can do food policy plans. They can work with nonprofits and government or businesses and academics to really synchronize it. And I definitely would like to write up some recommendations, like, micro papers on these recommendations for each stakeholder, because I know I didn't do the recommendations justice. I feel like that was kind of an area in my thesis that I didn't focus enough on for my recommendations, but that'll be for post master's life, hopefully, maybe a PhD if any of you are out there.
Right. Yeah, and I think that answered probably the next question from A. Bingham, who I think might be related to you.
An uncle, a great
How do
uncle.
you think this could be replicated in other states, and how you're going to spread the research and ideas? So yeah, I would tell everybody, watch this space in the next year or two. We're certainly hoping that Darren will be publishing some and putting some stuff out about this.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely local is geographically based. So depending on where you live and stuff, you need to have that local context and that local background in order to develop, and that's why I used Arizona as my boundary. I think you could do a state by state analysis is what I've done. And I hope that that actually happens, because I haven't really found anyone doing this.
right. Another question from Tina. Why do you think some rural areas, namely tribal communities, are so resilient with their food systems, and what can we do to support this?
Well, the best thing I can say is that within tribal communities, there's intentionally or unintentionally, there's been a decision to not provide them the resources or the businesses, the food systems that we maybe have in colonizer communities, in urban areas. And so food sovereignty and food security is important at an individual level, house by house level there, because they don't have a grocery store to go to. There are 13 grocery stores across the Navajo Nation, and it is bigger than states. And if you look at, the state of Arizona, there's over 125 Walmarts in the state of Arizona, but, the Navajo Nation has 13, and they serve, 200,000 people. So intentionally or unintentionally, the solutions need to be different, yet they're the same. Like, local food development is necessary, but in maybe a more urban area where there is grocery stores, we need to fix that system, as opposed to if you're on a reservation or in tribal nations, there is no grocery store to go to. So it's up to you or your neighbors to kind of build that network or build it for yourself. And I think that's just the beauty of local food, is it's manifested depending on who you are, where you come from, and what your needs are.
Okay, another question from the chat from Rapid Reboot. You've always been good at explaining ideas in a way anyone can understand. What one thing would you recommend saying to someone who's more resistant to eating local because it's, quote, inconvenient? Is this even true?
Well, it's inconvenient depending where you live. I would say now with COVID and the advent of the internet and technology, there are local food purchasing platforms, websites, apps, Instagram posts. They know me now, Instagram, so they send me all these food delivery processes, and that's something I've really wanted to do is how can we help consumers define what is local to them and then help them geographically get consumed by food that's local to them. I would say if it's inconvenient, the biggest thing I found is that people wanted to support their local economy and their local businesses. I think that's kind of a thing we don't talk about enough, but um, when you have a local business, you can actually go talk to the decision maker and you can align your values with them as opposed to Walmart. You can align your values to a brand, but not to an individual. And so I think telling people that responsibility is closer, but also you're supporting people you might know, you're helping your local economy, and humans like to see, touch, and feel things. They want to know that they're making an impact. And so I think that would be a big, I guess, thing for looking local. Also, just try to get one or two products, or for me, just grow one item of food. That's something I found with the kids I worked with is that you don't have to even buy everything, but like just know where food comes from. Try not to waste it because if you build that personal responsibility and that price, because it is more expensive sometimes, you're less likely to waste it.
Any other questions for Darren?